Welcome back to InfoWars Nightly News. I'm your host, Rob Dew, and we are now joined by three-time Emmy Award-winning journalist Amber Lyon, who was effectively ostracized from CNN for basically telling the truth, because that's not something you can do on mainstream media anymore. You have to follow the talking points that are handed down from above, which could come from the White House or it could come from major banks and corporations. Whoever is pulling the strings, that's where the news is coming from. And so she was laid off after she reported the massacres going on in Bahrain, which our corporate warlord masters didn't appreciate. So with that, we turn to the reporter, Amber Lyon. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me on.
So I basically want you to go from the beginning of this whole thing. Tell us a little bit about Bahrain, how it came into existence, how it's basically a puppet dictatorship, which I guess I'm kind of giving it away. But anyway, in your own words, what do you know about Bahrain?
Okay, well, first of all, a lot of people say that what does Bahrain matter to the United States? It's this country thousands of miles away, but it really means everything to all of us right now because our tax dollars are going to support this regime. It's also the home of the 5th Fleet Naval Base, and the U.S. needs that base now because it's right across from the Strait of Hormuz is Iran. And I don't know if you've noticed all the Iran propaganda on the news lately, but odds are we are headed into some kind of conflict or potential war with Iran. So the U.S. really wants this naval base. The problem is the majority of people living in Bahrain, 60 to 70%, want the U.S.-backed regime out of the country. And the U.S. doesn't want these people to win, the U.S. government, because if they do win, odds are they're going to tell the U.S. to get the heck out of their country because we've been giving this regime weapons and support, and this regime has proven to be oppressing these people for decades. I mean, we're talking, they've been jailing and torturing doctors, journalists, some of the most prominent members of society. So they don't want this story told. And I went to Bahrain and did a documentary and actually was able to uncover some of these horrific human rights abuses against doctors, even ambulance drivers who were beaten by security forces, people shot and killed in broad daylight by Bahraini forces as well. And when we got back to the U.S., at first, when I was working with CNN, we were able to get a lot of Bahrain coverage on air, but then the regime started calling in and complaining. And 3 months later, when our documentary was ready to air, it aired on CNN US, but never aired on CNN International. So, and that is the most watched English language station in the region. Also, it's the area where all of our sources, the Bahrain story was affected. We wanted these people to see this documentary. Shortly after, people at CNN started contacting me, employees who'd been there for decades, and writing me, telling me, this is very suspicious, you should look into this. And I started an investigation and then found out that Bahrain is actually a paying customer at CNN. I'm not kidding you. Bahrain gives money to CNN.
Well, there you go, because they want CNN to send reporters over to whitewash the situation, to promote, that Bahrain's a good peg in the cog of our war machine. And this was all during the time of the Arab Spring uprisings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So you guys were reporting on the same stuff. And what's funny is CNN was going around to these other countries and saying, look how great these protests are. These people want democracy. This is great that now Twitter and these social networks are spreading democracy around. But when you guys are doing the same exact thing in a U.S.-backed puppet dictatorship, well, then it's all hands off.
Yeah, and I was treated like a pain in the rear, almost like would you just kind of go away, instead of actually rewarding good quality journalism from my crew and my producers and uncovering these human rights abuses. It was very frustrating for me at the time because I heard the people of Bahrain literally shouting in the dark for help. And that's one of the most pure revolutions in the area because it's 60 to 70% of the population that wants this regime out. Meanwhile, you'd see CNN rewarding the reporters who were in Syria and Libya and these other countries. And really, had it not been for myself and a couple other journalists who I respect, the Bahrain story almost would have never made it on CNN. Because like I said, Bahrain is a paying customer at CNN. Bahrain literally pays CNN to create what I consider to be infomercials for dictators. And that's sponsored content that is disguised as news.
Is there a 1-800 number at the bottom where you can give to Bahrain? I mean, that's just, it's ludicrous. That how much money did they give to CNN? Do you know?
Well, that's a good question, because after I left, I wrote CNN and I said I felt I deserved, as a journalist who'd given 2 years of my life and passion to the network, I deserved to know. I felt defrauded when I found out Bahrain was paying CNN, and I was never given a response. No one ever wrote me back with any type of figures. But this is content that they're airing on CNN International during the daily, news cycle. And you're watching this content and you're seeing a reporter in one of the shows live from the Bahrain racetrack talking about how progressive the country is and how the crown prince is a reformer. And nowhere to be found is a disclosure telling you that Bahrain is actually paying for this content. Put things into perspective. Imagine if CNN was taking paid content from Assad or Ahmadinejad in Iran. I mean, people would be outraged. This is journalistically against all journalistic ethics. And I feel like CNN is defrauding viewers. And they're not only doing it with Bahrain, they're doing it with Kazakhstan, Georgia, Lebanon, and other countries. And it's a real shame, because it really worries me about the survival of journalism when you have the most trusted name in news airing stuff that is paid for by regimes that they're supposed to be a watchdog on. And another question I have is, what about the people? Were the oppressed people of Bahrain ever given the opportunity to go on CNN International and buy favorable content? Were they?
Exactly. Yeah. If you're going to let the dictator buy, why not at least let the people pony up the same amount so we can have a bidding war going for our propaganda that goes on? It's so disgustingly funny in terms of how this whole process is, and the veneer that they put on. And CNN's not the only company doing this. I know, Fox is engaged in it. MSNBC's engaged in it. You got the hard right, the hard left, and you got kind of CNN as sort of in the middle. And it's just over and over again we hear that they're putting in news, they're targeting things, and it's on all levels. It's on a local level. It's on a, if they want to get some kind of, vaccine shot thing put into place, or now they want to do this thing in San Antonio where they want to put RFID tags on students and track them. And they've got loads of news that come in for this. But then you talk to parents and students and other teachers, and they don't want it. And they go to school boards to speak, and there's silence. They're not given any time to talk. And it's whatever the mega corporate talking point is gets jammed down our throats on a consistent basis, and it really makes me sick. And I had a question in that, but I forgot it. But let's go back to Bahrain. How did they keep you guys from actually reporting the news? Didn't they steal some of your equipment, destroy your tapes? What did they do?
Yeah, and we had snuck into some villages. We kind of showed up at a time where Saudi troops, once again, this is all connected to Saudi Arabia as well. And Saudi troops were in Bahrain, and they'd taken over, and I don't know how we did it. It was a miracle, but we were able to avoid our government minders and actually sneak into some of these villages to film these human rights abuses. And as we were leaving one of the villages, a helicopter spotted us, and then we were soon surrounded by helicopters and masked men, about 20 masked men with machine guns, and they forced us onto the ground and pointed the guns at our heads, and then went through our van and found all of our video, grabbed cameras my producer was holding, and erased his video too. And so they thought they had erased all of the content that we filmed, but my producer and I actually had the discs with the most damning content hidden in our bras, and were able to get out of the country with that video. So you can imagine their surprise when we showed back up in the U.S. and started airing this content, because the Saudis and the Bahrainis had thought that they had just erased history, and unfortunately they hadn't. And this is a lot. The implications of the Bahrain censorship go much more deep than just CNN censoring something. This is all part of a plot right now to feed the nation propaganda about Iran and potentially get us into another war with Iran. And the U.S. government, as I was saying earlier, doesn't want the Bahrain revolution to succeed. So they don't want reporting on the human rights abuses there, because if that revolution succeeds, we're going to kick those protesters in Bahrain are going to kick the U.S. out of their country. You know, I mean, they're very upset with the U.S. We've been selling this oppressive regime weapons, more than $1 billion worth of weapons that they've been using to harm these protesters.
How does the police state compare, say, even to the, you know, compared to Saudi Arabia or the United States? How much surveillance was going on in Bahrain that you saw, just in a general terms, like in when you were out filming in the markets or at the malls? Did you feel there was a camera everywhere? Did you feel that the police were always watching, or even citizens were spying on you at any point?
Yeah, well, you saw the police presence was incredible. There were military tanks, military checkpoints almost in front of every neighborhood in town. At night, you would see these tanks drive by, and you just see about 10 masked men in camouflage outfits riding on top of these tanks. And
those are love soldiers, right? Those are love soldiers. Yeah.
Love soldiers, yeah, of course. And it's just a way to systematically terrify the people and try to squash dissent. And these people have been very resilient, and they've been able to really come out against all the odds and continue with their revolution. And all you have to do right now is head to YouTube and Google, you know, Bahrain revolution or Bahrain protesters take the streets, and you'll see hundreds of thousands of people at these marches in the street. It's unbelievable. You just see that the line just goes down the highway of people, and we're talking, Bahrain's about the size population-wise of San Francisco. And when you see this video, it really just hits you as to how pure this revolution is and how the majority of the people there want this regime out. Whether that will happen or not, who knows? But the U.S. for sure has been making it difficult for these people to succeed.
Of course, because we need that port there. We need to be able to encircle Iran, which, you know, we've got Iraq, we've got Afghanistan, we're looking at the Kazakhstan and dealing with them, and basically this is an encirclement maneuver, a long-range, long-term encirclement maneuver of Iran to eventually squash them out of existence. Let's go to, after this airs, you got calls from other producers at CNN that were telling you to stop doing this. You got calls from, I mean, what was the outcome, or what was the final effect of putting this documentary out?
About me coming forward about the censorship, or actually putting the documentary out onto CNN? Well,
putting it out, and then, yeah, go into the censorship, how afterwards they ended up laying you guys off, or a bunch of your division. How did that go?
Yeah, so what happened was the documentary did air one night on CNN US, but it did not air on CNN International, which is the most watched English news station in the area. I mean, this was the area that needed to see the documentary the most. Shortly after that happened, my crew was dumbfounded. Even bosses directly above me had no idea why. They couldn't explain why it didn't air on CNN International. So I went and met with the president, Tony Maddox, on 2 different occasions to ask for some answers. I thought my crew deserved it, deserved to know the truth, and I was never given any type of an explanation. CNN now says it was an editorial decision, but I'm not buying that, because many within CNN contacted me after that, employees who'd been there for decades, and told me to research this and that something suspicious was going on. And that's when I found out that Bahrain was a paying customer. I came forward with this information I'd say about a month ago. And when I first did, I just tweeted about it and let people know what was going on, because we've seen more and more of our human rights activists and sources that we had used in our stories go missing in Bahrain or end up jailed. And after I tweeted about the censorship, the executives, a representative for the executives, called my acting agent and told him that I needed to be quiet. If I continued to speak up, I would lose my health insurance and my severance. And then also after that, I think above all, I've had only a positive response for my former colleagues and journalists in general, because I think a lot of journalists know this is going on, and not just on the Bahrain story, on many stories within the corporate press. I mean, it's pretty obvious. All you have to do is turn on the TV and look at what the news is talking about and how they're trying to distract and feed the nation, this poor, unassuming Americans, with propaganda, instead of actually the real stories that matter. You know, right now we should not be talking about Justin Bieber on the news or celebrities. Look at the state our country's in. Journalism is printing something someone else doesn't want to be printed. Everything else is PR. And unfortunately, our mainstream media corporations, these corporate outlets, have evolved to just PR most of the time, and it's a shame for journalism.
I totally agree. We just actually put your Twitter page up. If you want to give that a plug real quick, you had some interesting things there. You were covering Bahrain, NDAA, issues that actually matter. So go ahead and plug your Twitter site, and I guess that's where you've got the most current stuff that you're talking about at this point.
Yeah, Twitter at Amber Lyon, Lyon, and I also have a Facebook page, facebook.com/Amber Lyon fans. If you go there, those are the most commonly updated. I have a website, amberlyonlive.com, but it's currently being refurbished. So I'd prefer if you'd stick with Twitter and Facebook for now until my new site's up. But yeah, I'm trying to keep this in the news and keep people talking about it, because the mainstream isn't. And stuff that's happening right now, even for us journalists, is very scary. The country's headed in an unknown yet frightening direction right now.
How do you feel about Chris Hedges' lawsuit coming out against the NDAA and other journalists that are speaking out? Is it giving you more confidence to say more, or do you feel it's going to increase, I guess, more people coming out, more whistleblowing?
Of course. I think Chris Hedges is a hero, because at a time when no one was really talking about the NDAA, he put his neck on the line and went out to fight against it, and he continues to right now. And he's doing that not only on behalf of journalists, but on behalf of the American people. The NDAA is terrifying. And there are very few times where, as journalists, we can come forward and actually take a stance. And we have taken a stance, a group of us, on NDAA, and says this needs to be repealed. It is so dangerous, especially to journalism. It will instill so much fear in our sources that it's going to make fewer and fewer sources able to come forward and talk to journalists and leak information that can be vital to the public good and discussion. And you know, and that threatens investigative journalism. Not only that, let's get to the terrorist clause, where the U.S. government now can essentially call anyone a terrorist and hold them indefinitely without trial.
Yeah.
You remember Nelson Mandela was once called a terrorist, Martin Luther King. So we're going to crush dissent with the NDAA, and most of the public in America doesn't even know this exists, and that's what scares me the most.
Well, it just came out a couple days ago that the Army considers people who go on social networks to be terrorists. I mean, they just broaden the definition to say, hey, you breathe air, you drink water, you must be a terrorist. I don't know what else to say. It's totally amazing that they can force feed their agenda on us on all these major platforms. And, you know, you have an informed populace at some level. Some people are informed, and they're out there getting alternative sources. But, you know, most of the public, they're jellyfish. And they're going to be watching this debate tonight thinking these are actually two people that are really speaking their mind and not reading from note cards and teleprompters. And I bet they already had the questions thrown at them beforehand. And
it's a shame. And you know what? I blame journalism. I blame the failure of the mainstream media, because the poor American public is not being informed. They're not being given the information that they need. And what makes me the most concerned about that is I'm seeing an escalation in propaganda toward a war with Iran. And I feel we're being led down the path like puppets, helpless puppets, into another war. Instead of Iraq this time, it's Iran. And the American people deserve better. You know, I grew up in the Midwest. My grandmother watches these mainstream outlets, and it kills me that she's being fed lies.
Yeah, and it's not going to take 10 to 15 years for 2,000 casualties U.S. casualties to appear in a war with Iran. That's going to be a weekly body count, because Iran does have capabilities. They're not just going to lay down and roll over. These people are are ready to fight. And I'm not looking forward to any more wars. I wish we could just get out of the business of war and get into the business of, you know, more space travel and building things and hover cars and stuff that we should have had years ago. Instead, you know, we spend our technology time and our brain power on killing people and controlling information and controlling things. What has happened, Amber Lyon, since you've come out with this message? How have you been persecuted even more? Have you found more leads? What's been going on?
I've been overwhelmed with emails from people supporting my decision, and I really appreciate it. Another reason I came forward was because people have known this is happening for so long, and I felt like they needed to be validated in their beliefs instead of always being called conspiracy theorists. So a lot of people thanked me for that. Journalistically, I've had an overwhelmingly positive response from former CNN colleagues as well as journalists in general. I'm hoping that this will encourage more journalists to come forward. Complacent journalists killing journalism, and in the end, they're going to be looked at as just as guilty as the corporations they work for, and on the wrong side of history, especially these journalists like Erin Burnett that are constantly feeding the public with Iran war propaganda on a nightly basis. I don't know how she sleeps at night. I really don't.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to see now with you coming out and Chris Hedges and Glenn Greenwald writing about this stuff, that we're going to see a domino effect of more journalists coming out, more sources coming forward, because now people are seeing, hey, you're not being set up, you're not being killed, you're not being targeted. You know, people may be mad, but what consequences have happened other than, you know, you don't have a job working for Bahrain's media mouthpiece anymore, you know, and who wants that job anyway? That's soulless. And so people, I think it's going to create a domino effect where more people come out and just start telling the truth and just realize that the truth is the most powerful weapon that we have at this point. It's more powerful than bombs and guns. It is. That's why they're afraid of it.
Exactly. And you know, the fact that CNN called my agent and tried to get me to shut up and threatened to take my health insurance and my severance, it just solidifies the fact that something's going on here and being covered up. And come on, you know, it's like, what's a paycheck if in the end you're really harming the American public and potentially costing lives? You know, part of the reason we entered Iraq was that the mainstream media repeated the phrase weapons of mass destruction an infinite number of times and instilled such a tremendous amount of fear in the American public that they went ahead and approved that war. And the same thing's happening right now with Iran. And like I said, these journalists that are doing it and know this is happening are just as guilty as the corporations that they work for, and they're on the wrong side of history.
I agree. I totally agree with that statement. They are going to feel their time will come where they're going to be judged, and it'll be either in this life or the next life, or, you know, when the mainstream media, which is falling, when they continue to fall, you're going to see those people getting the axe first, because anytime you serve this evil system, you may think you're protected, but what's going to happen is you're on the chopping block. You're the next one in line, and you know, that's all I could say to those people who are following the system right now, that they are going to fall, because they're at the end of the day, there's no room left to run when the dominoes start falling down, and we're going to win. That's what I think.
And the truth doesn't have a shelf life. It will come out. The kind of systematic censorship and screening of news and state TV-esque way of running these networks, it's going to come out. And I'm just hoping now that journalists that are sitting there with a conscience and see the screening every day of everything that's happening in the UAE, in Bahrain, the saturation of Iran war propaganda. People that are bothered by this, you know, it's time to come forward and quit. I mean, what's worse? I'd rather be broke and poor and living out of my car, but living there telling the truth than rich and feeding the public with lies.
Totally agree. And I just want to point out, since I went back and looked in our archives, I found an article from 2008. Pentagon expands propaganda reach with foreign news websites. Apparently, they were going around setting up, they were expanding, quote, information operations on the internet with purposely set up 4 news websites that are designed to look like independent media sources, but are in reality are nothing more than direct military propaganda. So this isn't limited to CNN. It's not limited to Fox News, or, you know, the Pentagon directly goes in and creates 4 news websites. They pay locals to act as independent journalists and basically to put in talking points. And that's the name of the game. If they think if they can repeat talking points enough, they can get a war with Iran, and that people will agree with it. And I think when this happens, it's going to be the death knell for these corporate powers, because when they go into Iran, it's going to be a lot of death and destruction on both sides.
And I can't shout about this loud enough, how much we're being misled into this war. If Iran has... one of the main reasons Iran wants nuclear weapons, or a nuclear weapon, is to keep the U.S. from invading the country.
Yeah.
Look what happened when Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi quit their nuke programs. The U.S. was able to go in and invade the country. It's mostly to be on you know, to protect the country from the U.S. actually going in and invading Iran. It would be suicide if Iran was to send 1 bomb over their borders into any other country. Then they're going to be attacked by 5,000 bombs. That's suicidal. The nuclear threat with Iran right now is being overhyped, and experts say the same forces behind the war in Iraq are behind now all of this propaganda sending us into Iran. This time, instead of weapons of mass destruction, it's nuclear weapons in the hands of Ahmadinejad.
Right. And they think 10 years people are going to fall asleep and buy the same thing again. And it's a new administration. So it's Obama. He's not a warmonger like Bush, when in reality he's starting just as many wars. He's following the same playbook of the elite, of the New World Order. I mean, he is following that playbook to basically get rid of sovereignty worldwide. Because when that happens, they can bring in a world government.
Exactly, and not only that, journalism. Obama's had a war on journalists and whistleblowers that we have never seen another president in our history attack journalists and whistleblowers like Obama. We need whistleblowers. We need whistleblowers to tell us that things are going wrong in the U.S. government so that we can fix them. If we don't have whistleblowers, we can never fix the system. We need journalists to expose corruption. And he's used the 1917 Espionage Act to go after more journalists and whistleblowers than any other president in history. And he's essentially, the black and white of the situation is he's turned journalists into criminals because he is subpoenaing journalists to give up information about their sources. And our #1 rule as journalists is we don't give up our sources. So if you're taking us to court because we won't do it, you're calling us criminals. And it's had a chilling effect on investigative journalism. And investigative journalism is our main watchdog on the U.S. government and on a potential war with Iran. And Obama is directly attacking that. So I don't see how he is any better than other presidents people have been criticizing. Journalistically, he's the worst we've ever had.
Well, he is giving out free cell phones. So I guess he can't be all that bad. Just kidding. But,
yeah, well, they're probably being monitored by the NSA as well. So
of course. Why do you think they're giving them out? You know, yeah, here's a free phone. You know, don't even get me started on that. But Amber Lyon, thanks for coming on the show today and shedding more light on these corporate cockroaches that are trying to take over the planet and basically tell people what to say and hide the truth. Because like you said, the truth has no shelf life. And if we have more people coming out like yourself and Ben Swan, he's another guy that's out there doing it, Glenn Greenwald, and you know, others out there who are out there, Chris Hedges, who are reporting the truth and just trying to, you know, hey, we might all have difference of opinions on how the world should, or how we should run our country, or how things should be run. But, you know, damn it, we need to stand up for the truth at the end of the day, because if we don't do that, we're no better than the people we're speaking out against. So.
I agree completely. And this is a critical time in our nation's history and survival. And we can either be led into another war like helpless puppets, or actually get up and get informed and figure out what's really going on, and find news sources that you feel are truthful and take action. Because I hear some people tell me information scares me too much. I can't handle it. But information is power. Information gives you the ability to look at the problem and find solutions.
There you go. We'll leave it at that. Thanks for coming on the show, and we will hope to see you again soon. And hopefully you'll have more breaking stuff, and people can follow you at Amber Lyon at twitter.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's Twitter, www.twitter.com/Amber Lyon or at Amber Lyon.
I don't tweet, so I don't know, but there you go.
Sick of the globalist eugenicist control freaks adding poison to your water and laughing as you get sick and die? Start purifying your water with ProPure. My friends, I've done a lot of research, and the best gravity filter out there, bar none, is ProPure, and it's available discounted at Infowars.com. Its filters are silver impregnated to prevent bacterial growth. There's no priming required. It's NSF 42 certified. Optional fluoride filters can reduce fluoride up to 95%. Easy to set up and use. Doesn't require electricity. Purify water from lakes, streams, ponds, and wells. This filter system leaves in beneficial minerals, which is key. Save money by not buying bottled water and avoid BPA that leaches from the plastic. ProPure is the best gravity-fed filter out there. It's what my family uses. Infowars.com already has the lowest price on ProPure. But if you add the promo code WATER at checkout, you get an additional 10% off at Infowars.com. You can also call to order 888-253-3139.
This whole thing. Tell us a little bit about Bahrain, how it came into existence, how it's basically a puppet dictatorship, which I guess I'm kind of giving it away. But anyway, in your own words, what do you know about Bahrain?
Okay, well, first of all, a lot of people say that what does Bahrain matter to the United States? It's this country thousands of miles away, but it really means everything to all of us right now because our tax dollars are going to support this regime. It's also the home of the 5th Fleet Naval Base, and the U.S. needs that base now because it's right across from the Strait of Hormuz is Iran. And I don't know if you've noticed all the Iran propaganda on the news lately, but odds are we are headed into some kind of conflict or potential war with Iran. So the U.S. really wants this naval base. The problem is the majority of people living in Bahrain, 60 to 70%, want the U.S.-backed regime out of the country. And the U.S. doesn't want these people to win, the U.S. government, because if they do win, and also it's the area where all of our sources, the Bahrain story was affected. We wanted these people to see this documentary. Shortly after, people at CNN started contacting me, employees who'd been there for decades, and writing me, telling me, this is very suspicious, you should look into this. And I started an investigation and then found out that Bahrain is actually a paying customer at CNN. I'm not kidding you. Bahrain gives money to CNN.
Well, there you go, because they want CNN to send reporters over to whitewash the situation, to promote, that Bahrain's a good peg in the cog of our war machine. And this was all during the time of the Arab Spring uprisings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So you guys were reporting on the same stuff. And what's funny is CNN was going around to these other countries and saying, look how great these protests are. These people want democracy. This is great that now Twitter and these social networks are spreading democracy around. But when you guys are doing the same exact...
Odds are they're going to tell the U.S. to get the heck out of their country because we've been giving this regime weapons and support, and this regime has proven to be oppressing these people for decades. I mean, we're talking, they've been jailing and torturing doctors, journalists, some of the most prominent members of society. So they don't want this story told. And I went to Bahrain and did a documentary and actually was able to uncover some of these horrific human rights abuses against doctors, even ambulance drivers who were beaten by security forces, people shot and killed in broad daylight by Bahraini forces as well. And when we got back to the U.S., at first, when I was working with CNN, we were able to get a lot of Bahrain coverage on air, but then the regime started calling in and complaining. And 3 months later, when our documentary was ready to air, it aired on CNN US, but never aired on CNN International. So, and that is the most watched English language station in the region.
Thing in a U.S.-backed puppet dictatorship, well, then it's all hands off.
Yeah, and I was treated like a pain in the rear, almost like would you just kind of go away instead of actually rewarding good quality journalism from my crew and my producers and uncovering these human rights abuses. It was very frustrating for me at the time because I heard the people of Bahrain literally shouting in the dark for help And that's one of the most pure revolutions in the area because it's 60 to 70% of the population that wants this regime out. Meanwhile, you'd see CNN rewarding the reporters who were in Syria and Libya and these other countries. And really, you know, had it not been for myself and a couple other journalists who I respect, the Bahrain story almost would have never made it on CNN. Because like I said, Bahrain is a paying customer at CNN. Bahrain literally pays CNN to create what I consider to be infomercials for dictators. And that's sponsored.
Welcome back to InfoWars Nightly News. I'm your host, Rob Dew, and we are now joined by three-time Emmy Award-winning journalist Amber Lyon, who was effectively ostracized from CNN for basically telling the truth, because that's not something you can do on mainstream media anymore. You have to follow the talking points that are handed down from above, which could come from the White House or it could come from major banks and corporations. Whoever is pulling the strings, that's where the news is coming from. And so she was laid off after she reported the massacres going on in Bahrain, which our corporate warlord masters didn't appreciate. So with that, we turn to the reporter, Amber Lyon. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me on.
So I basically want you to go from the beginning of this.